You think you know how power works. You think titles protect you, that love means something when the wolves circle. But here's the truth. Nobody tells you. The moment they smell blood, everyone you trusted will tear you apart. And the one holding the knife, that'll be the man who swore to stand beside you forever. Stay with me. Because what you're about to witness isn't just a fall from grace, it's the brutal unraveling of a woman who believed in loyalty, only to discover that in the Game of Thrones, belief is the first thing that gets you killed. And when she rises again, the entire kingdom will kneel before the queen they tried to erase. The rain came down like hammers on the cobblestones outside Westminster Palace. Each drop a percussion beat against stone and steel. Inside the great hall, 300 nobles stood shoulder to shoulder beneath vaulted ceilings that had witnessed coronations, executions, and every shade of treachery in between. The air was thick with perfume and sweat and something else. Anticipation. The kind that makes men lean forward in their seats, hungry for blood they don't have to spill themselves. Vivienne Ashcombe stood alone in the center of it all. She wore ivory silk, the fabric clinging to her frame like a second skin, every stitch a testament to the life she'd built beside the most powerful duke in England. Her dark hair was pinned with silver. No crown, never a crown, just the quiet elegance of a woman who'd never needed to announce herself. But tonight her hands were shaking, not much. Just enough that she kept them clasped in front of her, knuckles white, nails digging into her palms hard enough to draw blood. Across the hall, Cedric Ravenshire sat on the elevated dais reserved for the highest peers of the realm. Duke of the Northern Marches, Lord Commander of the Royal Guard, a man who could have been king if bloodlines worked differently. He didn't look at her, hadn't looked at her since the guards dragged her from their estate 3 nights ago. His jaw was locked, shoulders rigid beneath the black velvet of his formal robes, and his eyes, those eyes that used to soften when she entered a room, were stone. Vivienne wanted to scream at him. She wanted to run. She wanted to grab him by the collar and force him to see her, really see her, the way he used to when they were younger and the world was smaller. But she did none of those things, because the Vivienne Ashcombe the kingdom knew didn't scream, didn't run, didn't break. Not yet. Lord Chancellor Morton stepped forward, his robe sweeping the marble floor like a funeral shroud. He was an old man, skeleton thin, with a voice that carried like a preacher's even when he whispered. Tonight he wasn't whispering. "Your Grace," he said, addressing the room but meaning her. "Lady Vivienne Ashcombe, Duchess of Ravenshire, you stand accused of high treason against the crown of England. Do you understand the charges brought against you?" Her throat was dry. She swallowed, tasted copper. "I understand the words. I don't understand the lies." A murmur rippled through the hall. Morton's expression didn't change. He lifted a scroll, the wax seal already broken, and began to read. Conspiracy to undermine the authority of His Majesty King Aldwin. Theft of royal documents pertaining to succession and military deployments. Communication with foreign agents seeking to destabilize the realm. Forged correspondence implicating members of parliament in acts of sedition. Each accusation landed like a stone. Vivienne felt the weight of them piling on her chest, crushing the air from her lungs. She tried to catch Cedric's eye again. Still nothing. "These are lies," she said, louder now, every word of it. "I have never—" "Evidence has been presented," Mortain cut her off. "Letters bearing your seal. Testimonies from 3 separate witnesses, all of whom have sworn under oath that you solicited their aid in treasonous acts. The documents were found in your private chambers, Your Grace, hidden beneath a floorboard." She laughed. It came out sharp, bitter, wrong. "You think I'm stupid enough to hide stolen royal papers under my own floor? You think I'd sign my name to treason?" Morton's eyes were cold. Arrogance is not a defense. The hall erupted. Nobles shouted over one another, some calling for her immediate execution, others demanding a formal trial, a few, precious few, calling for restraint. But the loudest voice in the room was silence. Cedric's silence. It roared louder than all of them combined. Vivienne's knees buckled. She caught herself, forced her spine straight. She would not fall. Not here. Not in front of them. Then Cedric stood. The hall went quiet. Every eye turned to the Duke. He was tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who looked like he'd been carved from granite and taught to fight before he learned to walk. His hair was dark, shot through with early gray at the temples, and his face, God, his face, was the face she used to trace with her fingers in the dark, memorizing every line, every scar. Now it was a mask. He walked down from the dais, boots echoing on marble, and stopped 3 feet in front of her. Close enough that she could see the muscle ticking in his jaw, close enough that she could smell the wine on his breath. "Cedric," she whispered, "please." His voice was flat, empty. "Did you do it?" Her breath caught. "What? Did you conspire against the crown?" "No." She said it like a prayer, like a vow. "I swear to you, I didn't. I would never—" He turned his back on her, addressed Mortan. "The evidence is clear. The testimonies are consistent. My wife, former wife, has brought shame upon my house and dishonor upon the realm." Vivienne's world tilted. Former wife. Cedric continued, his voice steady, clinical. "I call upon this court to strip Lady Vivienne Ashcombe of all titles, lands, and privileges afforded to her by marriage to the House of Ravenshire. Furthermore, I move that she be exiled from England immediately, never to return under penalty of death." The hall exploded. Cheers, gasps, a few scattered boos drowned out by the roar. Mortain raised a hand for silence, but his smile was already creeping across his face. "The motion is seconded by Lord Blackthorne and Lord Ashford. All in favor?" A sea of hands. Vivienne couldn't breathe, couldn't think. She looked at Cedric's back, at the rigid line of his shoulders, and something inside her snapped. Not broke. Snapped. Like a bone that heals wrong. "You coward," she said. He didn't turn. "You goddamn coward!" She stepped forward, voice rising. "You're going to stand there and let them do this? You know me, Cedric. You know I would never betray you, never betray this kingdom. And you're just going to... What? Throw me away because it's easier than fighting for me?" Still nothing. She laughed again, wild now, unhinged. "Fine. Fine, exile me. Strip my name. But when the truth comes out, and it will, I hope you choke on it." Cedric finally turned. His eyes met hers. For a split second she saw it. The crack in the mask, the flicker of doubt, maybe even regret. But then it was gone, swallowed by something colder. "Goodbye, Vivienne." The guards moved in before she could respond. Heavy hands on her arms, dragging her backward toward the doors. She didn't fight, didn't scream. She just kept her eyes on Cedric as the distance between them grew, memorizing the shape of his betrayal. The last thing she heard before the doors slammed shut was the sound of the court applauding. Ticket. The ship was a rotting hulk, the kind of vessel reserved for criminals and cargo no one cared about losing. The deck reeked of brine and mildew, and the crew, what little there was, watched her with the dull curiosity of men who'd seen too much to be surprised by anything. Vivienne stood at the railing, staring back at the shrinking coastline of England. The white cliffs of Dover glowed in the moonlight, and somewhere beyond them, in the city she'd called home for 10 years, the nobles were celebrating, toasting her downfall with wine paid for by her husband's coffers. A sailor approached, hat in hand. "Begging your pardon, milady, but you'll want to come below deck. Storm's coming in fast." She didn't look at him. "Let it come." The sailor hesitated, then shuffled away. Vivienne closed her eyes and let the wind tear at her hair, her dress, her skin. Let it strip her down to nothing. Maybe that's what she needed, to be nothing, to start over as something unrecognizable. But even as the thought crossed her mind, she felt something else rising in her chest. Not despair, not grief. Something sharper, hotter, anger. She opened her eyes. The cliffs were gone now, swallowed by darkness. England was behind her. The future was ahead. And for the first time in 3 days, Vivienne Ashcombe smiled. The storm hit 2 hours later. Waves like mountains, wind that screamed, lightning turning the sky white. The crew fought to keep the ship upright while Vivienne huddled below deck, wedged into a corner with her arms wrapped around her knees. Water poured through the cracks in the hull, soaking her to the bone, and she thought, absurdly, that this was it. This was how she died, drowned in the dark while the kingdom that destroyed her slept soundly. But she didn't die. The storm passed. The ship limped into a harbor on the northern coast of France 3 days later, half destroyed but still afloat. Vivienne stumbled onto the dock, legs weak, stomach empty, and looked around at the unfamiliar faces, the foreign tongues, the world that didn't know her name. For the first time in her life, she was free, and she had absolutely no idea what to do with it. Bom. The first month was survival. She sold the jewelry she'd managed to hide in the lining of her dress, a sapphire brooch, a pearl necklace, a ring Cedric had given her on their wedding night. Each sale felt like cutting off a piece of herself, but she did it anyway. Sentiment was a luxury she couldn't afford. She rented a room above a tavern in a port town called Calais. The walls were paper thin, the bed was a plank with a straw mattress, and the smell of fish and ale seeped through the floorboards day and night. But it was hers. No guards. No court. No husband watching her every move. At night, she lay awake and replayed the trial in her mind. The letters. The testimonies. The way Mortan had smiled when Cedric turned his back. It didn't make sense. She'd been careful her entire life. Careful with her words, her actions, her alliances. She'd never given anyone a reason to suspect her of anything, let alone treason, which meant someone had set her up. The question was who and why. She started making lists in her head. Names, faces, people who'd smiled at her in public and whispered behind her back. Lord Blackthorn, who'd always resented Cedric's influence with the king. Lady Margot, who'd lost a bid for a marriage alliance when Cedric chose Vivienne instead. Morton himself, who'd been angling for more power in Parliament for years. But none of it mattered. Not yet, because even if she figured out who'd framed her, what could she do? She was exiled, powerless, a ghost. She needed to become something else. The turning point came 6 weeks into her exile. She was sitting in the corner of the tavern, nursing a cup of watered-down wine and trying to ignore the stares from the men at the bar, when a woman sat down across from her. The woman was older, maybe 50, with sharp eyes and a scar running from her temple to her jawline. She wore travel-stained clothes and carried herself like someone who'd spent more time on horseback than in a drawing room. "You're the English Duchess," the woman said. Not a question. Vivienne's hand tightened on her cup. "I don't know what you're talking about." The woman smiled. "Relax, I'm not here to turn you in. I'm here to offer you a job." Vivienne stared at her. "A job. My name is Alara. I run let's call it a network. Information, resources, people who need things done quietly. I've been watching you since you arrived. You're smart, careful, and you've got nothing to lose." Vivienne's laugh was bitter. "So you want to hire me because I'm desperate. I want to hire you because you're angry." Alara leaned forward. "And angry women get shit done." Vivienne should have walked away, should have told this stranger to go to hell. But instead, she met Alara's eyes and said, "What do you need?" Alara's smile widened. "That's the spirit." The work started small, delivering messages, gathering information, sitting in taverns and coffee houses, listening to merchants and sailors talk about trade routes, political shifts, rumors from across the channel. Vivienne discovered she had a talent for it, blending in, asking the right questions, piecing together fragments of information into something useful. And she learned? She learned that King Aldwin's health was worse than anyone in England wanted to admit. That Parliament was fracturing into factions, each one backing a different candidate for the throne. That the nobles who'd cheered for her exile were now tearing each other apart behind closed doors. She learned that Cedric had withdrawn from court, that he'd stopped attending Parliament sessions, stopped hosting state dinners, stopped doing anything except drinking himself numb in the Ravenshire estate. She told herself she didn't care. She also learned something else, something that made her blood run cold and set her heart racing at the same time. Her mother's maiden name had been Evangeline Courtland. Vivienne had always known that. What she hadn't known was that the Courtlands weren't just minor gentry. They were descended from the Aurelian line, a royal bloodline that had been erased from history after the War of the Thorns, a brutal succession conflict that had nearly torn England apart 2 centuries ago. The Aurelians had lost. Their lands had been seized, their titles stripped, their records burned. The survivors had gone into hiding, scattered across Europe, and over time, the name had faded into legend, but the blood was still there, in her veins, in her bones. Vivienne stood in the cramped attic of a Parisian library, staring at a genealogical chart so old the parchment was crumbling, and felt the world shift beneath her feet. She wasn't just an exiled duchess, she was a queen. The realization didn't come with trumpets or fanfare. It came with a cold, creeping certainty that settled into her chest and refused to leave. At first, she told herself it didn't matter. The Aurelian line was dead, forgotten. Even if she could prove her heritage, no one would care. England had moved on. But then she started paying closer attention to the rumors filtering across the channel. King Aldwin was dying. Everyone knew it, and he had no legitimate heir, no son, no daughter, no clear successor. Parliament was in chaos. The leading candidates were distant cousins, minor nobles, men with weak claims and weaker support. The kingdom was on the brink of civil war, and the only thing holding it together was the fiction that someone, anyone, would step forward with an undeniable right to the throne. Vivienne sat in a coffeehouse in Paris, surrounded by maps and ledgers and letters, and thought, what if that someone was me? It was insane, impossible. She had no army, no allies, no proof beyond a handful of crumbling documents that most people would dismiss as forgeries. But she also had nothing to lose. She thought about Cedric, about the way he'd looked at her in that hall, his face empty, his voice cold, about the 10 years she'd spent loving him, supporting him, believing that loyalty mattered. And she thought, fuck him. Fuck all of them. If they wanted a war, she'd give them one. Building an alliance took time. Months. Nearly a year. Vivienne moved through Europe like a shadow, meeting with exiled nobles, disillusioned generals, merchants who were tired of England's instability disrupting their trade routes. She didn't promise them power. She promised them stability. Order. A ruler who wouldn't tear the kingdom apart for personal gain. Some believed her, some didn't. But slowly, piece by piece, she built a network. She also started training. Not in politics, she'd learned that at Cedric's side, but in survival. She learned to ride hard and fast, to shoot, to fight with a blade when necessary. She cut her hair short, dyed it darker, and stopped wearing silk. The Duchess was gone. In her place was someone harder, sharper, someone dangerous. News from England grew worse. King Aldwin finally died, and Parliament dissolved into open warfare. Not with swords, not yet, but with bribes, blackmail, and assassinations disguised as accidents. 3 candidates emerged as frontrunners: Lord Blackthorne, Lady Margot's son Edmund, and a distant cousin of the royal family named Philip, who had the personality of wet bread but the backing of the church. Cedric's name never came up. He'd removed himself from the game entirely. Vivienne told herself she didn't care. She told herself a lot of things. And then, one cold morning in late autumn, a letter arrived. No seal, no signature, just a single line written in a hand she recognized instantly. They're planning to crown Blackthorne in 3 weeks. If you're going to do something, do it now. Vivienne stared at the letter, her hands shaking. She knew that handwriting, had seen it 1,000 times on correspondence, legal documents, notes left on her pillow. Cedric. She burned the letter before anyone else could see it, but the message was clear. It was time. The journey back to England was a blur. She traveled under a false name, accompanied by a small group of loyalists, soldiers, merchants, a few minor nobles who'd pledged their support. They moved fast, avoiding major cities, sticking to the back roads and forgotten routes. By the time they reached the outskirts of London, word had already spread, not about her specifically, but about something, a disruption, a challenge, the kind of thing that made Parliament nervous. Vivienne stood on a hill overlooking the city, the Thames snaking through the heart of it like a scar, and felt something she hadn't felt in over a year. Hope. Not the soft, fragile kind, the kind that burned. The night before the coronation, she made her move. Not a violent one, not yet. She sent messengers to every major noble house, every guild, every faction that mattered. The message was simple. If you want to know the truth about the Ashcombe trial, come to Westminster tomorrow. If you want to avoid a civil war, come to Westminster tomorrow. If you care about this kingdom at all, come to Westminster tomorrow. She didn't sign it, didn't need to. By dawn, the rumors were everywhere. The Great Hall of Westminster had never been so full. Every seat was taken, every corner packed with bodies. Nobles who hadn't spoken to each other in months stood shoulder to shoulder. The air was electric, charged with the kind of tension that precedes violence. At the front of the hall, Lord Blackthorne sat in the chair reserved for the king-to-be. He looked smug, confident, a man who thought this game was over. And then the doors opened. Vivienne walked in. She wore white. Not ivory, not cream, pure, blinding white. A gown that shimmered like moonlight, with a train that swept the floor behind her. Her hair was pinned up, revealing the sharp lines of her face, and around her neck hung a pendant she'd inherited from her mother, a silver medallion bearing the crest of the Aurelian line. The hall went silent. She walked slowly, deliberately, her eyes locked on Blackthorn. Behind her came her allies, soldiers in polished armor, nobles bearing the seals of their houses, and at the very back, an old man in the robes of a royal archivist. Blackthorn stood. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Vivienne stopped in the center of the hall, exactly where she'd stood the night they exiled her. She smiled. "My name is Vivienne Ashcombe. I am the last living descendant of the Aurelian bloodline, and I am the rightful heir to the crown of England." The hall erupted. Blackthorn was shouting. Mortain was on his feet, face red, demanding order. But Vivienne didn't move. She waited. The archivist stepped forward. He carried a leather case, cracked with age, and from it he produced documents, birth records, marriage contracts, genealogical charts sealed with wax that predated the current dynasty by 200 years. One by one, he laid them on the table in front of the assembled lords. "These records," he said, his voice steady, "prove beyond doubt that the Aurelian line survived the War of the Thorns. That Lady Vivienne is the direct descendant of King Aldric the Just, and that under the laws of succession established in 1423, she has a stronger claim to the throne than any candidate currently before this parliament." Silence. Not the stunned kind, the calculating kind. Then someone in the back shouted, "What about the treason charges?" Vivienne's smile widened. She gestured to another man who stepped forward, a foreign diplomat, one she'd spent months cultivating. He carried a different set of documents. "These," he said, "are the original letters allegedly written by Lady Vivienne. They were forged. The seals are fake. The handwriting is a copy. And the witnesses who testified against her? 2 are now dead under suspicious circumstances. The third has confessed, under oath, that he was paid by Lord Mortain to lie." The hall exploded again. Mortain lunged for the exit, but guards blocked his path. Blackthorn's face went white. Vivienne turned to face the room. Every eye was on her. "I was exiled for a crime I didn't commit. I was betrayed by people I trusted. And I was cast out of a kingdom I loved. But I didn't come back for revenge. I came back because England is tearing itself apart, and you need a ruler who won't let it burn." She paused. Let the words sink in. You can crown Blackthorn. You can crown Philip. You can tear each other apart until there's nothing left. Or you can accept the truth. I am your queen. Not because I want power, but because this kingdom deserves better than what you've given it. One by one, the nobles began to kneel. Not all of them, not at first, but enough. And then she saw him. Cedric. He stood at the edge of the hall, half hidden in shadow. Their eyes met across the crowd. His face was gaunt, hollowed out by months of self-destruction. But his eyes, those damned eyes, were full of something she couldn't name. He took a step forward, then another. And then he knelt. The hall fell silent. Vivienne's chest tightened. She wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, to ask him why he'd waited so long, but instead she turned away. Because she didn't need his apology. She was already a queen. The coronation was set for 3 months later, time enough to stabilize Parliament, arrest the conspirators, and prepare the kingdom for a new era. Vivienne spent those months working, negotiating treaties, dismantling corrupt systems, meeting with common families who'd been crushed under the weight of noble greed. She didn't see Cedric. He'd resigned from public life, withdrawn to his estate, and disappeared from court entirely. She told herself she didn't care. But late at night, alone in the chambers that would soon belong to a queen, she thought about him, about the man he'd been when they first met, about the way he used to hold her like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to the world. And she thought, I loved you. God help me, I loved you. But love wasn't enough. On the eve of her coronation, a letter arrived. No seal, no signature, just 2 words, forgive me. Vivienne read it once, then burned it. Well, the day of the coronation dawned bright and cold. The streets of London were packed with people, thousands of them. pressing against the barriers, waving banners, shouting her name. Not Ashcombe, not Duchess. Vivienne. Just Vivienne. She stood in the palace, dressed in gold and crimson, the crown resting on a velvet pillow in front of her. It was heavier than she'd imagined, cold. A servant approached. "Your Majesty, it's time." She nodded, picked up the crown, felt the weight of it in her hands, and thought, "This is it. This is what you fought for. This is what you became." But as she walked toward the doors, toward the cheering crowd and the throne that waited, she couldn't help but wonder, was it worth it? The doors opened, the crowd roared, and Vivienne Ashcombe, queen of a kingdom that had tried to destroy her, stepped into the light. The blade was real, the threat was real, and Vivienne didn't know it yet. She stood on the balcony overlooking the courtyard where 1,000 faces turned upward, like flowers to the sun, their cheers rolling through the air in waves that should have felt like victory. But all she felt was the weight. The crown wasn't on her head yet. That ceremony was hours away. But she could already feel it pressing down on her skull, a circle of gold and expectation that promised to crush her if she showed even a flicker of weakness. Behind her, the palace hummed with preparation, servants rushing through corridors, guards repositioning at every entrance, advisors whispering in clusters, their eyes darting toward her whenever they thought she wasn't looking. Everyone wanted something, everyone expected something, and not one of them had asked if she was ready. She wasn't. A hand touched her shoulder. She spun, instinct overriding protocol, and found herself staring into the weathered face of Alara. The older woman hadn't changed much in the months since Paris. Same scar, same calculating eyes, same way of appearing exactly when Vivienne needed her most. "You need to come inside," Alara said quietly. "Now." Vivienne glanced back at the crowd. They were still cheering, still believing. "I have an hour before—" "You have less than that if the man with the knife gets to you first." The words landed like a slap. Vivienne's hand went instinctively to her side where a blade would have been if she were still the woman who'd survived exile. But she wasn't wearing weapons today. Queens didn't carry knives. Queens had guards for that. Alara's expression said exactly what she thought of that logic. Inside, now. The chamber Alara led her to was small, tucked away in a part of the palace most people forgot existed. No windows. One door. A single table with maps and documents spread across its surface like entrails. 3 men stood around it, soldiers Vivienne recognized from her time in France, men who'd bled for her when she had nothing to offer but promises. One of them, a scarred veteran named Marcus, looked up as she entered. "Your Majesty." Whoa. The title still felt wrong, like wearing someone else's skin. "Don't call me that. Not yet." Marcus didn't argue. "We intercepted a courier 2 hours ago. He was carrying orders to someone inside the palace. Coded, but we broke it." He slid a paper across the table. The message was short, 3 lines. But the last one made Vivienne's blood go cold. "Strike during the coronation. Make it look like Parliament. Ensure no successor." "Who sent this?" Vivienne said, her voice flat. Marcus hesitated. "That's where it gets complicated. The seal on the orders belongs to a house that doesn't officially exist anymore. The Greymoor line. They were wiped out during the War of the Thorns." "Same as mine," Vivienne said. "Not the same," Alara cut in. "Your line was erased from history. Theirs was erased because they were traitors. They backed the losing side and paid for it with everything. But apparently, some of them survived. And they've been waiting 200 years for a chance to take back what they think is theirs." Vivienne stared at the paper. "So they want me dead. They want the throne destabilized," Marcus corrected. "If you die before you're crowned, Parliament collapses. The kingdom tears itself apart, and whoever's left standing gets to write the history books." "Let me guess," Vivienne said. "They think that'll be them." Alara nodded. "They've been funding half the conspiracies in Europe for decades. Blackmail. Assassinations. They're patient, methodical, and they're very good at making things look like someone else's fault." Vivienne's jaw tightened. "Where's the assassin now?" "We don't know," Marcus admitted. "Could be a servant, a guard, someone in the crowd. We've locked down the palace, but there are 3,000 people here today. Finding one man with a blade is like finding a needle in a burning haystack." Vivienne looked at the 3 of them, then cancel the coronation. Silence. "You can't," Alara said finally. "Watch me. If you cancel," Alara's voice was steady but hard. You prove you're afraid. You prove you're vulnerable. Every faction that's been waiting to see if you're strong enough to hold this throne will move against you. You'll have civil war by sunset, better than dead by noon. Is it? Alara stepped closer. You didn't claw your way back from exile to hide in a locked room. You came back to rule. That means walking into the fire and coming out the other side. If you can't do that, then none of this was worth it. Vivienne's hands curled into fists. Easy for you to say. You're not the one with the target on your back. Alara's smile was thin. I've had a target on my back since I was 15. The difference between you and me is I learned to enjoy it. Vivienne wanted to argue, wanted to scream. Instead, she looked at Marcus. Double the guard, change the route to the cathedral, and find that courier. I want to know who he talked to, who he ate with, who he fucked. Everything. Marcus nodded and left. The other two soldiers followed. Alara stayed. You're scared, she said. Not a question. Vivienne didn't deny it. I'm terrified. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. Just don't let it make you small. What if I'm not enough? Vivienne said quietly. What if I get up there and the crown doesn't fit? What if I can't hold this kingdom together? Alara laughed. A short, bitter sound. You think any of them were enough? The kings and queens whose portraits hang in those halls? Half of them were drunks. A quarter were cowards. The rest were monsters. But they wore the crown anyway. And you know why? Why? Because someone has to. Because power doesn't care if you're ready. It just cares if you can hold on. Vivienne met her eyes. And if I can't? Alara shrugged. Then you die. And someone worse takes your place. The hours before the coronation passed in a blur of controlled chaos. Vivienne was dressed by hands she didn't recognize, her hair pinned and repinned until it felt like her skull was being crushed, her face painted with powder and rouge that made her look like a stranger in the mirror. The gown was gold and crimson, heavy enough to remind her with every step that she was carrying the weight of a kingdom. She hated it, but she wore it anyway. The procession to the cathedral was supposed to be a celebration. Banners lining the streets, music, crowds pressed against barriers, their faces bright with hope and hunger. Vivienne sat in the royal carriage, back straight, hands folded in her lap, and watched them through the window like she was watching a play. They don't know you, a voice in her head whispered. They don't know what you've done to get here. They think you're a hero. She wasn't a hero. She was a survivor, and survival wasn't pretty. The carriage jolted as it hit a rut in the road. Vivienne's hand shot out to steady herself, and she felt the knife strapped to her thigh beneath the layers of fabric. Alara had insisted. Queens don't carry knives, Vivienne had argued. This one does, Alara had replied, and slid the blade into her hand. Now Vivienne was grateful. The cathedral loomed ahead, its spires cutting into the gray sky like blades. The crowd noise grew louder, more frenzied. Vivienne could see faces now, individual people, mouths open, hands reaching. She wondered if the assassin was out there, wondered if he was watching her right now, calculating angles, waiting for the perfect moment. The carriage stopped. The door opened. Vivienne stepped out into the roar. Inside the cathedral, the air was thick with incense and anticipation. Every pew was packed, every inch of standing room occupied. Nobles in their finest silks, merchants in new coats. Common folk crammed into the back, craning their necks to see. At the front, the archbishop waited, his face serene, his hands folded over the crown that rested on a velvet cushion. Vivienne walked down the aisle alone. No escort, no guards flanking her, just her and the weight of 1,000 eyes. Every step felt like walking a tightrope. One misstep and she'd fall. One moment of doubt and they'd tear her apart. She reached the altar, knelt. The archbishop's voice washed over her. Latin words she barely understood, something about duty and divine right and the will of God. She stopped listening. Her eyes scanned the crowd instead, searching for anything out of place. A hand in the wrong pocket. A face turned away. Movement where there should be stillness. Nothing. The archbishop lifted the crown. Vivienne closed her eyes. This is it. This is the moment. Everything you fought for. Everything you've lost. The crown touched her head, and then someone screamed. Chaos erupted. Vivienne's eyes snapped open just in time to see a figure in the crowd lunge forward, arm raised, something glinting in his hand. Guards moved, but not fast enough. The man was fast, trained, closing the distance in seconds. Vivienne didn't think. She moved. Her hand went to her thigh, found the knife, pulled it free in one smooth motion. The man was on her, blade arcing down toward her chest. She twisted, felt the edge of his weapon graze her shoulder, and drove her own knife up and into his ribs. He gasped, staggered, blood poured hot over her hands. Vivienne yanked the blade free and shoved him backward. He collapsed at the base of the altar, twitching, choking on his own blood. Guards swarmed him, but it was already over. The cathedral was silent, every eye on Vivienne, on the blood dripping from her hands, on the crown that had fallen to the floor during the struggle. She looked down at the dying man. His face was young, barely 20, eyes wide with shock and pain and something else, betrayal. Like he'd expected her to be easy, like he'd thought a queen wouldn't know how to kill. Vivienne picked up the crown, placed it on her own head, looked out at the crowd. Anyone else? Her voice cut through the silence like a blade. No one moved. She turned to the archbishop. His face was pale, hands trembling. Finish it. He stammered something in Latin. Vivienne didn't wait for him to complete the ritual. She turned to face the assembly, blood still on her hands, crown heavy on her head, and spoke. I didn't ask for this. I didn't want this. But I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. So if you have a problem with that, come at me now. Because once I walk out of this cathedral, I'm your queen, and queens don't forgive. Silence. Then slowly, one by one, they knelt. All of them. Even the ones who hated her. Even the ones who'd bet against her. They knelt because she'd proven something they couldn't ignore. She was willing to spill blood to keep the crown, and in that moment, Vivienne understood something she hadn't before. Power wasn't given, it wasn't earned, it was taken, and held, by force if necessary. She walked out of the cathedral alone, crown on her head, blood drying on her hands, and didn't look back. The palace was locked down within the hour. Guards at every entrance. No one in or out without clearance. Vivienne stood in the council chamber, still wearing the coronation gown, still covered in blood, and watched as Marcus dragged in the courier they'd captured earlier. The man was middle-aged, soft around the middle, the kind of person who blended into crowds by design. His eyes were panicked now, darting between Vivienne and the guards like a trapped animal. Vivienne didn't sit. She stood over him, arms crossed. Who sent the orders? The courier's mouth opened, closed. I don't... Vivienne's hand shot out and grabbed him by the throat, not hard enough to choke him, just hard enough to make him feel how close he was to dying. Try again. Greymore, he gasped. Lord Matthias Greymore. He's been in exile. France, Spain, moving around. He has people everywhere. Servants, guards, nobles. He's been planning this for years. Planning what? To take back the throne. To finish what his family started during the War of the Thorns. Vivienne released him. He crumpled to the floor, gasping. Where is he now? The courier shook his head. I don't know. He never stays in one place. But he said if the first attempt failed, there'd be others. That you'd never be safe, that eventually you'd make a mistake. Vivienne looked at Marcus. Find him. I don't care how long it takes. I don't care what it costs. Find him. Marcus nodded. And when we do? Vivienne's smile was cold. Bring him to me. The first weeks of her reign were brutal. Parliament fought her on every decision. The nobles resented her reforms. The common folk expected miracles. And every night she went to bed wondering if she'd wake up to another assassin's blade. But she didn't break. She couldn't afford to. She dismantled the old guard piece by piece, removed corrupt judges, stripped lands from families who'd grown fat on exploitation, redistributed wealth in ways that made the aristocracy howl, and when they pushed back, she pushed harder. You're making enemies, Elara warned one night. Vivienne was reviewing execution orders, signing them without hesitation. Good. Let them hate me. As long as they fear me more. Fear doesn't last forever. Neither do I. Vivienne looked up. But while I'm here, I'm going to make sure this kingdom survives, even if it hates me for it. Elara studied her for a long moment. You've changed. I had to. Alara nodded slowly. Just don't lose yourself in the process. Vivienne didn't answer. Because the truth was, she wasn't sure there was anything left to lose. The woman who'd stood in Westminster a year ago, begging her husband to believe her, was gone, burned away in the fires of exile and survival. What was left was something harder, colder, something that could rule. Cedric's letter arrived 3 months into her reign. No preamble, no apology, just a request. I need to see you. Vivienne stared at the words for a long time. She should have ignored it, should have burned it. But instead, she found herself writing back. 1 meeting, that's all. They met in a private garden on the palace grounds, far from prying eyes. Cedric looked worse than she remembered, thinner, older. His hair was streaked with more gray, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He stood when she approached, but didn't move closer. Your Majesty. Don't, Vivienne said. Not from you. He nodded, looked away. I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything. Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Finally, Cedric spoke. I was wrong. About everything. I should have believed you. Should have fought for you. And I didn't. And I have to live with that for the rest of my life. Vivienne's chest tightened. So do I. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. You're right. You don't. His jaw clenched. Then why did you agree to see me? Because I needed to know if there was anything left of the man I married. Vivienne met his eyes. And now I do. She turned to leave. Cedric caught her arm. Wait. She looked down at his hand on her sleeve. Let go. He did. Immediately. But his voice followed her. I still love you. Vivienne stopped. Didn't turn around. Love isn't enough, Cedric. It never was. Then what is? She looked back at him over her shoulder. Survival. That's all that matters now. She walked away and didn't look back. The reports came in slowly at first. Whispers, rumors. A lord found dead in his chambers, throat slit, no sign of forced entry. A merchant convoy ambushed on the road, goods stolen, everyone killed. A fire in a village that had pledged loyalty to Vivienne, 20 dead, no explanation. Graymore was making his move, not with armies, with shadows. Vivienne called an emergency council. The chamber was packed with advisors, generals, nobles who'd thrown their support behind her. She stood at the head of the table, maps spread out in front of her, red marks indicating every attack, every suspicious death. He's testing us, she said, seeing how we respond, waiting for us to fracture. Then we hit back, one of the generals said, hard. Show him we won't be intimidated. With what? Vivienne's voice was sharp. We don't know where he is. We don't know how many people he has. If we strike blindly, we'll waste resources and look weak. So what do you suggest? Another noble asked. That we do nothing. No, Vivienne said. We draw him out. The room went quiet. How? Marcus asked. Vivienne's smile was cold. We give him a target he can't resist. Me. The room erupted. Voices shouting over each other, advisors calling it madness, generals arguing logistics. But Vivienne didn't move. She waited for the noise to die down, then spoke again. He wants me dead. Fine. Let him try. But this time we'll be ready. We set a trap. Make it look like I'm vulnerable. And when he comes for me, we end this. And if the trap fails, Alara's voice cut through the noise. Vivienne met her eyes. Then I die. But at least we'll know where he is. The plan was simple in theory. Vivienne would attend a public event in a week's time, a festival in the city, open to everyone, minimal security. Word would be leaked that she'd be alone, exposed. Graymore would see the opportunity and strike. And when he did, they'd be waiting. The days leading up to the festival were tense. Vivienne went through her daily routines, signed documents, held meetings, all while knowing that every moment could be her last. She slept with a knife under her pillow and woke at every sound. She didn't tell Cedric about the plan, didn't tell anyone outside her inner circle. The fewer people who knew, the better. The night before the festival, Alara found her standing on the balcony, staring out at the city. You're sure about this? Vivienne didn't look at her. No. Good. If you were sure, I'd think you'd lost your mind. Vivienne laughed. A short, bitter sound. Maybe I have. Alara stepped beside her. For what it's worth, I think you'll survive. You're too stubborn to die. That what it takes? Stubbornness? That and a willingness to do whatever it costs. Alara paused. You've got both. Vivienne finally looked at her. And if I don't come back, then I'll make sure your kingdom doesn't fall apart. Alara's voice was steady. That's what you pay me for. Vivienne smiled. It felt strange, like a muscle she'd forgotten how to use. Thanks. Don't thank me yet. You might still die tomorrow. The festival was chaos. Thousands of people packed into the square, music blaring, food stalls overflowing, children running through the crowds. Vivienne walked through it all in a simple cloak, hood pulled low, surrounded by guards disguised as common folk. She felt exposed, vulnerable. Every face could be an enemy. Every hand could hold a blade. She forced herself to breathe, to move naturally, to look like a queen confident in her people's love. It was a lie, but lies were all she had. Hours passed. Nothing happened. Vivienne began to wonder if Graymore had seen through the trap, if this was all for nothing. And then she saw him. Not Graymore, but a man who didn't belong. Too still in a crowd that was constantly moving, eyes locked on her, hand inside his coat. Vivienne's heart slammed against her ribs. She caught Marcus's eye, gave the signal. The man moved. So did they. Guards closed in from every side, cutting off his escape. The man pulled a knife, slashed at the nearest guard, and ran. Vivienne followed, instinct overriding logic. She couldn't let him get away. Couldn't let this chance slip through her fingers. She chased him through the crowd, people scattering, screams rising. The man was fast, but Vivienne was faster. She'd spent a year running for her life. This was nothing. He ducked into an alley. Vivienne followed without thinking. Mistake. The man stopped, turned, and behind him 10 more figures stepped out of the shadows. Vivienne's hand went to her blade, but she knew. She was outnumbered, outmatched. This was it. The moment she'd been dreading. One of the figures stepped forward, pulling back his hood. The face beneath was sharp, aristocratic, with eyes that burned with old hatred. Lord Matthias Graymore, he smiled. Your Majesty, how kind of you to accept my invitation. Vivienne's grip tightened on her knife. This isn't an invitation. It's a trap. For you or for me. Graymore's smile widened. I suppose we're about to find out. Behind him, his men drew weapons. Vivienne looked back. The alley entrance was blocked. No way out. She was alone, surrounded, and no one was coming to save her. Graymore took a step closer. You should have stayed in exile, he said softly. Should have lived quietly, died quietly. But you had to come back, had to take what's mine. It was never yours, Vivienne said, his face twisted with rage. My family bled for that throne. We lost everything. And you, some nobody with a convenient bloodline, you think you deserve it? I don't care what I deserve, Vivienne said. I care what I can hold. Then let's see you hold this. He lunged. Vivienne moved, blade up, deflecting his strike. But she wasn't fast enough. One of his men came from the side, caught her arm, twisted. Her knife clattered to the ground. Another man grabbed her from behind, pinning her arms. Graymore stepped close, his blade at her throat. Any last words, Your Majesty? Vivienne smiled, blood on her teeth. Just one. Now. The alley exploded with movement. Guards poured in from every side. Rooftops, hidden doorways, the blocked entrance suddenly clear. Graymore's men didn't stand a chance. They were surrounded, outnumbered, outmaneuvered. It was over in seconds. Graymore stared at her, realization dawning in his eyes. You knew? Vivienne's smile widened. I'm not the same woman you tried to destroy. I'm the one who learned from it. Guards dragged him to his knees. Vivienne picked up her knife, looked down at him. You should have killed me when you had the chance, she said softly. His face twisted with fury. This isn't over. It is for you. She turned and walked away, leaving him screaming her name. Graymore's trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. The sentence was death. Vivienne watched from the throne as they led him to the executioner's block. He didn't beg, didn't plead, just stared at her with hatred so pure it could have burned. The axe fell. The crowd cheered, and Vivienne felt nothing. What? That night, alone in her chambers, she finally let herself collapse. Not physically, But something inside her cracked. The weight of it all, the crown, the blood, the choices she'd made came crashing down. She'd won. She'd survived. She'd secured her throne, but the cost was everything she used to be. There was a knock at the door. She didn't answer. It opened anyway. Cedric stood in the doorway. "What are you doing here?" Vivienne said, her voice flat. "I heard what happened." He stepped inside, closed the door. "I wanted to make sure you were all right." "I'm fine. You're not." She looked at him, really looked, and saw the truth. He wasn't here because he loved her. He was here because he needed to believe she was still the woman he'd married. That somewhere beneath the crown and the blood, there was something salvageable. There wasn't. "You need to leave," she said. "Vivienne," I said, "leave." He hesitated, then nodded, turned toward the door. But before he left, he looked back. "I'm sorry for all of it." Vivienne didn't respond, just watched him go. And when the door closed, she finally allowed herself to cry. Not for him, not for the woman she used to be, but for the woman she'd become, and the terrible certainty that there was no going back. The tears dried on her face like salt water, leaving tracks she didn't bother to wipe away. Vivienne sat alone in the dark chamber, crown discarded on the table, and felt the hollowness settle into her bones. Victory was supposed to feel different, supposed to mean something, but all she felt was empty. Like she'd won a throne made of ashes and called it glory. The knock came again, softer this time. She didn't answer, didn't move, just stared at the candle flame guttering in its holder, watching shadows dance across stone walls that had witnessed centuries of power plays and broken promises. The door opened anyway, not Cedric this time. Alara. The older woman crossed the room without asking permission, poured 2 glasses of wine from the decanter on the side table, and set one in front of Vivienne. "You need to drink something that isn't your own misery." Vivienne looked at the glass, then at Alara. "I killed a man today." "You've killed before. Not like this. Not in front of everyone. Not as queen." Alara sat across from her, took a long drink from her own glass. "That's what being queen means. Making the choices no one else wants to make. Getting blood on your hands so theirs stay clean." Vivienne's laugh was hollow. "You make it sound noble. It's not. It's survival." Alara leaned forward. "But you already knew that. You knew it the moment you drove that knife into the assassin's ribs during your coronation. You knew it when you set the trap for Greymore. You just didn't want to admit what you'd become. And what's that? Someone who does what's necessary." Alara's eyes were steady. "Someone who can rule." Vivienne picked up the wine. Drank. It burned going down. "What if I don't want to be that person anymore?" "Then you die. Or worse, you watch everyone who depends on you die while you second-guess yourself into paralysis." Alara stood. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow, we deal with Parliament. They're already circling like sharks who smell weakness." "I'm not weak. I know, but they don't. Not yet." Alara paused at the door. "Prove it to them before they decide to test you." She left. Vivienne sat alone in the silence, feeling the weight of the crown even though it wasn't on her head. Power was a prison, and she'd fought so hard to get inside. Ushaik. Morning came too fast and not fast enough. Vivienne dressed herself, waving away the servants who tried to help. She needed the control, needed to feel her own hands fastening clasps, tying laces, preparing armor even if it was made of silk and brocade instead of steel. The face in the mirror looked like a stranger, pale, hard, eyes that had seen too much and learned too little about how to forget. She picked up the crown, felt its weight, then placed it on her head and walked out to face her kingdom. Parliament was already assembled when she arrived. The chamber buzzed with conversation that died the moment she entered. Every eye turned, every face a mask of calculation. These men and women had knelt to her, had sworn loyalty. But loyalty in politics was as stable as smoke. Vivienne took her seat at the head of the table, looked around at the assembled lords and ladies. "Well, who wants to tell me what's really on your mind?" Silence, the kind that precedes violence or confession. Then Lord Ashford cleared his throat. He was old money, old power, the kind of man who'd survived 3 monarchs by knowing exactly when to speak and when to shut his mouth. "Your Majesty, there are concerns about the executions, about the reforms, about the pace of change." "Change makes people nervous," Vivienne said flatly. "They'll adapt. Some fear you're moving too fast, destabilizing institutions that have kept England functional for centuries. You mean institutions that have kept you wealthy and comfortable while the rest of the kingdom starved? Vivienne's voice was sharp. Those institutions are why we almost had a civil war. They're why corruption spread like rot through every level of government. I'm not here to preserve them. I'm here to burn them down and build something better. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Ashford's face remained carefully neutral. And if Parliament disagrees with your methods, then Parliament can find itself dissolved. Vivienne leaned forward. I didn't fight my way back from exile to play games with men who think power is their birthright. You want to keep your seats? Earn them. Prove you can serve this kingdom instead of just serving yourselves. The murmurs grew louder, angrier. But no one stood. No one challenged her directly, because they were afraid. And fear was the only currency that mattered. Vivienne stood. This meeting is over. You have 1 week to present proposals for genuine reform, anti-corruption measures, land redistribution, protection for common families. If I don't see real effort, I'll appoint a new parliament, one that actually gives a damn about the people they're supposed to represent. She walked out before anyone could respond, felt their eyes on her back like knives waiting to strike. This was power. This feeling of standing on a cliff edge with nothing but your will keeping you from falling. She hated it. She needed it. And she couldn't tell the difference anymore. The message arrived 3 days later, unmarked, sealed with black wax, delivered by a boy who vanished into the streets before the guards could question him. Vivienne broke the seal alone in her study. The handwriting inside was elegant, educated, unfamiliar. You think you've won. You think removing Greymore ended the threat. But he was just a pawn. The real game is about to begin. Watch your closest allies. One of them has already betrayed you. And by the time you figure out who, it will be too late. No signature, no demands, just a promise wrapped in threat. Vivienne read it 3 times, then burned it, but the words stayed with her, burrowing into her mind like parasites. One of them has already betrayed you. She thought about her inner circle. Marcus, the soldier who'd bled for her in France. Alara, who'd taught her how to survive when she had nothing. The advisors who'd pledged loyalty when it was dangerous to do so. The guards who stood outside her door every night. Which one? Or was the letter itself the betrayal? A lie designed to make her paranoid, to fracture the trust that held her power together? She couldn't afford to ignore it, but she couldn't afford to believe it either. So she did what she'd learned to do. She watched and waited and prepared for the worst. The first crack appeared 2 weeks later. A supply convoy meant for the Northern Territories was ambushed. Not by bandits, by soldiers wearing royal colors. 20 men dead, all the grain and medicine stolen. And when the bodies were recovered, each one had a message carved into their chest. Long live the true crown. Vivienne stood in the council chamber, staring at the report spread across the table. This wasn't random violence. This was a statement. Someone was building an opposition force, and they were doing it using her own resources. How? She said quietly. How did they get royal colors? How did they know the convoy route? How did they move an armed force through 3 checkpoints without being stopped? Marcus stood at her side, jaw tight. Someone gave them the information. Someone with access to logistics, supply routes, patrol schedules. Who has that access? Everyone in this room. Vivienne looked around the table. 12 advisors, 3 generals, half a dozen nobles who'd earned their place through merit instead of birth. Any one of them could be the traitor. Or none of them. Or all of them. The paranoia was setting in. Exactly what the letter writer wanted. Lock down all military movements, Vivienne said. No one moves supplies without my direct authorization. No one adjusts patrol routes without written orders bearing my seal. And I want background checks on every soldier, every servant, every person who's had access to sensitive information in the last 6 months. That's thousands of people, one of the generals protested. Then it will take time. Vivienne's voice was cold. Start now. The meeting dissolved. People filed out, whispering to each other. Vivienne caught the looks, the doubt creeping in. They were starting to wonder if she was capable of holding this together. She wondered the same thing. Alara found her that night in the armory. Vivienne was stripping and cleaning weapons she didn't know how to use properly, just needing something to do with her hands. "You're spiraling," Alara said bluntly. "I'm adapting. You're falling apart." "There's a difference." Vivienne slammed the blade down on the table. "Someone in my inner circle is a traitor. Someone I trusted is actively working to destroy everything I've built. How the hell am I supposed to not spiral? By remembering that paranoia is a weapon, and right now you're using it on yourself." Alara picked up the blade, examined it. Whoever sent that letter wanted this exact reaction. Wanted you to turn on your own people, fracture your support base, make yourself vulnerable. Then what do? You do what you've always done. You survive. You adapt. And you trust your instincts. My instincts say everyone's a threat. Then your instincts are keeping you alive. Alara met her eyes. But don't let them make you stupid. Fear is useful. Panic is fatal. Vivienne took the blade back. How do you do it? How do you trust anyone in a world where everyone's trying to use you? I don't trust anyone. I just make sure the cost of betraying me is higher than the benefit. Alara's smile was thin. You should try it. The second attack came faster than expected. A fire in the Treasury building. Not big enough to destroy everything, but targeted. Specific ledgers burned, records of payments, contracts, land transfers. All the documentation Vivienne needed to prove corruption and enforce her reforms. Gone. Turned to ash. She stood in the ruins, smoke still rising, and felt something inside her crack wider. This wasn't about killing her. This was about destroying her legitimacy, making it impossible for her to rule effectively. Death by 1,000 cuts. Who had access to the treasury? Who knew which records mattered? Who could set a fire without being seen? Too many people. Too many possibilities. And then she saw it. A small detail. A scrap of cloth caught on a broken beam. Royal blue with gold thread. The colors of her personal guard. Her blood went cold. She turned to Marcus. "Find out which guards were on duty last night. All of them. I want names, schedules, backgrounds, everything." Marcus nodded, left immediately. Vivienne stood alone in the ashes and felt the weight of isolation settle over her like a shroud. If she couldn't trust her own guards, she couldn't trust anyone. Batik. The investigation took 3 days. 3 days of questioning, cross-referencing, searching quarters and belongings. 3 days of watching her own people look at her with fear and resentment. And then Marcus came to her with a name. Lieutenant Thomas Brennan. Been with your guard since you returned to England. Exemplary record. No red flags. But his quarters had traces of accelerant, and his schedule had him near the treasury the night of the fire. Where is he now? In custody. Waiting for you. Vivienne didn't hesitate. She went straight to the holding cells, Marcus at her side, and found Brennan shackled to a chair in a windowless room. He looked up when she entered. Young, maybe 25. Face hard with resolve. Why? Vivienne said simply. Brennan smiled, cold. Because you're not the rightful queen. Because the Aurelian line should have stayed dead. Because England doesn't need a foreign-backed pretender on the throne. I was born in England. My mother was English. Your mother was a traitor's daughter. Her family should have been wiped out with the rest of the Aurelians. But they survived. Hid, waited. And now you think you can just take back what was never yours? Vivienne stepped closer. Who's paying you? Brennan's smile widened. You really don't know, do you? You think Greymore was the only one. You think killing him solved your problem. Answer the question. I'm a patriot. I don't need payment to defend my kingdom from usurpers. Vivienne grabbed him by the throat. Not hard. Just enough to make him feel the pressure. Who is paying you? Brennan laughed, choked on it, but didn't break. Vivienne released him, stepped back. Marcus. The soldier stepped forward, placed a dagger on the table between them. Standard interrogation protocol. They could make him talk. It would just take time and pain. But Vivienne saw something in Brennan's eyes. A certainty. A willingness to die rather than betray whoever was behind this. She'd seen that look before. In her own mirror. Lock him up, she said. Solitary. No contact with anyone. We'll revisit this when he's had time to think about whether his loyalty is worth dying for. She left before Brennan could respond, but his laughter followed her down the corridor. That night, Vivienne couldn't sleep. She paced her chambers, mind racing through possibilities. Greymore was dead, his network supposedly dismantled, but someone had picked up where he left off. Someone with resources, with access, with a long-term plan. Who benefited from her failure? Who had the most to gain if she fell? Parliament. But they were fractured, fighting among themselves for scraps of influence. The nobility. But most of them had bent the knee, pledged loyalty. Breaking that oath meant death. The military. But the generals answered to her, didn't they? Or someone else? Someone she hadn't considered. Someone who'd been there all along, waiting for the right moment. The thought made her sick. She was standing at the window, staring out at the city, when the door opened behind her. She spun, hand going to the knife at her hip. But it was just Alara, except Alara wasn't alone. Marcus was with her. And 3 guards, all of them armed. Vivienne's heart slammed against her ribs. What's going on? Alara's face was unreadable. We need to talk about who's really behind the attacks. Then talk. Alara glanced at Marcus. He stepped forward, jaw tight. We've found something in Brennan's cell. After you left. What? A letter. Hidden in his boot. We almost missed it. Marcus pulled out a folded piece of parchment. It's addressed to someone on your council. Someone who's been feeding information to the opposition since the beginning. Vivienne's breath caught. Who? Marcus hesitated, then handed her the letter. Vivienne unfolded it, read the name at the top, felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Lord Edmund Ashford. Chancellor of the Exchequer. The man who'd questioned her reforms, who'd spoken for caution, who'd been at her side since she returned to England. Can't be, she whispered. It is, Alara said quietly. He's been funding the attacks, coordinating with Greymore's remaining loyalists, using his position to sabotage your reforms from the inside. And he's been planning this since before you were crowned. Vivienne's hands shook. Why? Because he backed a different candidate for the throne, Edmund's son. He thought he could control you. When he realized he couldn't, he decided to remove you. Vivienne looked up. Where is he now? In his estate. We have it surrounded, but we wanted your orders before we moved. Vivienne's mind raced. Ashford, the man who'd helped draft her reforms, who'd advised her on Parliament, who'd been one of the first to kneel. He'd been lying the entire time, and she'd believed him. Bring him in, she said. Her voice was steady now, cold, alive. Bring him in chains, and make sure everyone sees. They arrested Ashford at dawn, dragged him from his estate in front of his family, his servants, his guards. He didn't resist, didn't scream, just looked at Vivienne with something that might have been disappointment. She felt nothing. The trial was public, held in the same hall where she'd been condemned a year ago. The evidence was overwhelming. Letters, financial records, testimonies from Brennan and others who'd been caught in the net. Ashford didn't deny any of it. He stood before her, proud and unrepentant. You're not a queen, he said. You're a warlord in a crown, and this kingdom will suffer for it. This kingdom was already suffering, Vivienne replied. You just want to make sure it suffers in ways that benefit you. The sentence was death, same as Greymore, same as every traitor before him. But this time, Vivienne didn't watch. She signed the execution order and walked away. Because watching wouldn't change anything, wouldn't make her feel better, wouldn't undo the betrayal. It would just remind her that everyone she trusted would eventually try to destroy her. The executions continued. Ashford, Brennan, 12 others implicated in the conspiracy. Parliament was purged. The military restructured. Every system Vivienne had built was torn down and rebuilt with tighter controls, more oversight, less trust. She became what she'd feared, a ruler who saw threats everywhere, who responded to dissent with force, who valued stability over mercy. And the kingdom obeyed. Because fear worked. Because strength worked. Because people would rather kneel to a tyrant they could predict than risk chaos they couldn't control. Vivienne sat on her throne, crown heavy on her head, and watched her subjects bow. Victory. This was victory. It felt like drowning. Cedric came to her one last time, a month after Ashford's execution. He looked older, broken, like a man who'd finally realized what he'd lost. I heard what happened, he said. I'm sorry. Vivienne didn't look at him. Sorry doesn't fix anything. I know. He hesitated. I just wanted you to know that I see what this is doing to you, what ruling is costing you. It's costing me everything. She finally met his eyes. But I don't have a choice. If I show weakness, they'll tear me apart. If I show mercy, they'll see it as vulnerability. The only way to survive is to be harder than everyone else. Colder, more ruthless. That's not who you are. Her laugh was bitter. It's exactly who I am now. You made sure of that when you turned your back on me, when you chose politics over love. You taught me that trust is a weapon people use against you, and I learned the lesson well. Cedric's face crumpled. Vivienne, please. Leave, she said, and don't come back. I don't have room in my life for ghosts. He stood there for a long moment, then nodded, turned, walked away. And Vivienne sat alone on her throne, surrounded by guards who feared her, advisors who obeyed her, and subjects who would never love her. She'd won the crown, lost her soul, and had no idea how to get it back, or if she even wanted to anymore. The final blow came on a night when winter had settled over London like a funeral shroud. Vivienne was reviewing execution orders. There were always more execution orders, when Alara entered without knocking. One look at her face and Vivienne knew something was wrong, something worse than conspiracies and assassins. What is it? Alara closed the door, locked it. There's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you a long time ago. Vivienne's blood went cold. What? Alara sat down, took a breath, then spoke. I'm the one who sent the first letter, the one warning you about a traitor in your inner circle. Vivienne stared at her. What? I needed you to be paranoid, needed you to tighten security, question everyone, become the kind of ruler who couldn't be undermined, because I knew Ashford was planning something. I just didn't have proof yet. So I planted the seed, made you suspicious, and you did exactly what I needed you to do. You manipulated me. I protected you. Alara's voice was steady. You were too trusting, too willing to believe in loyalty. I had to break that. Had to make you see that power requires vigilance, requires ruthlessness. Vivienne stood. Her hands shook with rage. You used me, turned me into this, made me destroy relationships, question everyone, become a tyrant, all because you thought you knew better. I did know better. Alara stood to face her. And you're alive because of it. You're queen because of it. Ashford would have destroyed you if you'd stayed soft. Greymore would have killed you if you'd hesitated. I made you strong enough to survive. Vivienne grabbed the knife from her belt, pressed the point against Alara's throat. Give me one reason not to kill you right now. Alara didn't flinch. Because you need me. Because I'm the only person in this palace who tells you the truth. And because deep down, you know I'm right. The blade trembled in Vivienne's hand. She wanted to drive it home, wanted to end this, to make the betrayal stop. But Alara was right about everything. Vivienne lowered the knife. Get out! Alara nodded, started toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I never lied about respecting you. You're the strongest person I've ever met, and you're going to be a great queen, even if you hate yourself for it. She left. Vivienne stood alone in the silence, knife still in her hand, and felt the last piece of her old self crumble to dust. She'd become what the kingdom needed, what survival demanded, what power required, a monster wearing a crown, and there was no going back. The next morning, Vivienne made her decision. She called a full assembly of Parliament, the military, and every noble house that mattered, packed the hall until there was standing room only. She walked in wearing black. No gold, no crimson. Just black silk and cold steel. The crown on her head felt like it belonged there now. She didn't sit, just stood at the center of the hall and spoke. You wanted a queen who could hold this kingdom together, who could make the hard choices, who wouldn't break under pressure. Well, here I am. I've executed traitors, dismantled conspiracies, reformed systems that were designed to exploit you. And I've done it all while you whispered behind my back, questioned my methods, and waited for me to fail. The hall was silent, but I'm still here, still standing, still wearing this crown. And I'm going to keep wearing it. Not because I want to, not because I enjoy it, but because someone has to. Because if I don't, this kingdom tears itself apart. And I didn't survive exile, assassination attempts, and betrayal just to watch England burn. She paused. Let the words sink in. So here's what happens next. You can accept my rule, follow the reforms, build a kingdom worth living in, or you can oppose me, plot against me, try to take this crown. But understand this. Every person who's tried to destroy me has died, and I'm done showing mercy to people who see it as weakness. She looked around the room, met every eye. I am your queen, and I will rule this kingdom with or without your love. But I will not tolerate your betrayal, not anymore. The hall erupted in response, some cheering, some silent, some openly hostile. Vivienne didn't care. She'd said what needed to be said. She walked out and didn't look back. That night, alone in her chambers, Vivienne removed the crown, set it on the table, stared at it like it was a living thing. This was her life now, this isolation, this constant vigilance, this slow transformation into something unrecognizable. She thought about the woman who'd stood in this same palace a year ago, begging her husband to believe her innocence. That woman was gone, burned away in the fires of survival. What was left was someone who could rule, who could kill, who could make impossible choices and live with the consequences. Someone who would never trust again, never love again, never be vulnerable again. Because vulnerability was death, and death was the only thing she couldn't afford. Vivienne picked up the crown, placed it back on her head, felt its weight settle like a yoke, and made her peace with the monster she'd become. Because the alternative was destruction. And she'd fought too hard to lose now, even if winning meant losing everything that made her human. The door opened. A messenger entered. Your Majesty, urgent news from the northern border. Vivienne turned. Her face was stone. Her voice was ice. Speak. And as the messenger delivered reports of new threats, new enemies, new fires to extinguish, Vivienne understood the final truth. This would never end. The crown was a curse that demanded everything and gave nothing back, and she would wear it until it killed her. Because that's what queens do. They survive. They rule. They sacrifice. And they die alone. The messenger's words cut through the silence like a blade through flesh. Your Majesty, the northern border is under attack. 3 garrisons overrun. The enemy is moving south, fast. Vivienne's hand tightened on the armrest of her throne. How many? At least 5,000. Maybe more. They're flying no banner we recognize, but their tactics are coordinated, professional. This isn't a raid. It's an invasion. The room tilted. Not literally, but Vivienne felt the ground shift beneath her feet anyway. 5,000 soldiers didn't just appear out of nowhere. Someone had been building an army, training them, feeding them, hiding them. And she'd been too focused on internal threats to see the external one coming. Who's leading them? The messenger hesitated. We don't know yet, but prisoners taken at the first garrison said something before they died. They said the true king is coming home. Vivienne stood. The crown felt heavier than it ever had. How long until they reach London? 3 days. Maybe 4 if we can slow them down. 3 days to prepare for war. 3 days to hold together a kingdom that was already fracturing. 3 days to prove she was strong enough to survive this. Or 3 days to watch everything she'd built burn to ash. Summon the war council, she said. Now. And get Marcus. I need every available soldier mobilized within the hour. The messenger bowed and ran. Vivienne stood alone in the throne room, staring at the empty hall, and felt something she hadn't felt in months. Not fear. Fear was old, familiar. This was something else. Something that lived in the space between survival and extinction. The kind of clarity that only comes when you realize you're about to lose everything and there's nothing left to do but fight. She'd become a monster to hold this throne. Now she'd find out if monsters could win wars. The War Council assembled in controlled chaos. Generals shouting over maps, advisors calculating supply lines, nobles demanding explanations Vivienne didn't have time to give. She stood at the head of the table, crown still on her head, and slammed her hand down hard enough to crack the wood. Silence. We have 3 days, she said. Maybe less. An army is marching on London and we're going to stop it. I don't care how. I don't care what it costs. We're going to hold this city and we're going to crush anyone who thinks they can take it from us. General Hawthorne, a scarred veteran who'd fought in half a dozen campaigns, stepped forward. Your Majesty, with respect, we don't have the numbers. Most of our forces are scattered across the kingdom maintaining order. We can maybe muster 2,000 defenders in 3 days. Against 5,000 trained soldiers, we'll be slaughtered. Then we don't fight them in open field, Vivienne said. We make them come to us. We fortify the city, set traps, use the terrain, make every street a killing ground and every building a fortress. That's a siege strategy, another general said. Sieges take months. We have days. Then we make those days count. Vivienne looked around the table. Every man here has fought battles. Every woman here has survived impossible odds. This is no different. We adapt or we die. What about reinforcements? Marcus asked. The southern garrisons are 2 weeks away minimum. Vivienne cut him off. We can't wait for them. We work with what we have. And if we can't hold, one of the nobles asked quietly, what then? Vivienne met his eyes. Then we go down fighting, but we don't surrender. Not to invaders, not to pretenders, not to anyone. The room was silent. Then Hawthorne nodded. Tell us what you need. The next 72 hours were a blur of preparation that felt like controlled falling. Vivienne slept in 2-hour bursts, ate standing up, and spent every waking moment coordinating defenses that might not be enough. The city transformed. Barricades went up at every major intersection. Civilians were evacuated or armed depending on their ability to fight. Food stores were moved into fortified positions. Wells were guarded. Every advantage that could be squeezed from stone and steel was wrung dry. And through it all, Vivienne was everywhere. On the walls, in the streets, talking to soldiers who looked at her like she was either their salvation or their doom. She didn't know which, didn't care, as long as they fought. On the second night, she found Alara on the northern ramparts, staring out at the darkness where the enemy was coming from. You should be resting, Alara said without turning. So should you. I don't need rest. I need a miracle. Alara finally looked at her. Do you understand what's coming? This isn't Greymoor. This isn't a conspiracy you can unravel. This is an army. And they're going to hit us like a hammer. I know. Then why aren't you scared? Vivienne leaned against the stone wall. I am scared, terrified, but fear doesn't change anything. It just slows you down. So I'm choosing to be angry instead. Anger won't stop arrows. No, but it'll keep me standing when the arrows come. Vivienne turned to face her. You manipulated me, used me, turned me into something I hate, and you know what? You were right. I needed to become this, needed to be hard enough to survive. So thank you for that. And fuck you for making it necessary. Alara's smile was thin. You're welcome. And I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Just fight. I will. Alara paused. For what it's worth, I think you're going to win this. Why? Because you're too stubborn to die. And the universe respects stubbornness. Vivienne laughed, a short, bitter sound. Let's hope you're right. The army appeared on the morning of the third day. Not as a trickle, as a flood. 5,000 soldiers in formation, banners now visible in the dawn light, black and silver, a crowned serpent eating its own tail. Vivienne recognized the symbol from history books, the Caelthris line. Another royal bloodline supposedly wiped out during the Wars of Succession. Apparently extinct wasn't as permanent as historians thought. She stood on the walls of London, Marcus at her side, and watched the army stop just outside arrow range. They weren't attacking, not yet. They were making a statement, showing their strength, letting fear do the work before steel did. A single rider broke from the formation, rode forward under a white flag, stopped at the base of the wall and looked up. His voice carried, I bring a message from King Aldrich Caelthris, rightful heir to the throne of England. He offers terms. Vivienne leaned over the wall. I'm listening. Surrender the crown, abdicate peacefully, and you'll be allowed to live in exile. No harm will come to you or your supporters. Refuse, and we take the city by force. Every man, woman, and child who resists will be put to the sword. Vivienne smiled. Cold. Tell your king I have a counteroffer. The rider waited. He can take his rightful claim and shove it up his ass. This is my city, my kingdom. And if he wants the crown, he can pry it from my cold, dead hands. The rider's face remained neutral. So be it. You have until sunset to reconsider. After that, we attack. He turned his horse and rode back. The army didn't move. Just waited. Patient. Confident. Vivienne stepped back from the wall. Looked at Marcus. How long can we hold? If they hit us at sunset? Maybe through the night. Maybe not. Depends on how coordinated they are. And after that we're fighting street to street, house to house, until someone runs out of bodies. Vivienne nodded. Then we make every body count. Gote. Sunset came too fast. The sky turned red and gold, like the gods were painting the horizon with blood. Vivienne stood with her soldiers on the wall, blade at her hip, crown on her head, and watched the enemy army begin to move. They came in waves. First the archers, thousands of arrows darkening the sky like locusts. Vivienne's forces ducked behind cover, shields up, and returned fire. Bodies fell on both sides. Not enough. Never enough. Then the siege engines. Catapults launching stones that shattered against walls built to withstand centuries. Cracks appeared. Sections crumbled. Defenders scrambled to plug gaps with rubble and bodies. Then the infantry. Ladders hitting walls, grappling hooks catching stone. Soldiers climbing, fighting, dying. The sound was deafening. Metal on metal. Screams. Orders shouted and ignored. Chaos given form. Vivienne fought alongside her men. Not from a distance, not from safety. She was on the wall, blade in hand, cutting down anyone who made it over. Her arms burned. Her lungs screamed. Blood soaked her clothes, some hers, most not. And through it all, she felt something she hadn't felt since before her exile. Alive. Not surviving, not calculating, just existing in the moment, reacting, moving, killing. This was what it meant to have nothing left to lose. To be so far past fear that all that remained was action. A soldier came at her from the side. She spun, drove her blade through his throat, yanked it free, and moved to the next. And the next. And the next. Somewhere in the chaos, Marcus was shouting orders. Elara was rallying defenders on the eastern wall. General Hawthorne was coordinating the reserve forces. But Vivienne didn't think about any of that. She just fought. Because that's what monsters did. They fought. They survived. They refused to die. The attack lasted through the night. By dawn, the enemy had been pushed back. Not defeated, just temporarily repelled. The wall still stood, barely. Sections were on the verge of collapse. Bodies littered the base. The smell of blood and smoke hung in the air like a physical thing. Vivienne stood in the courtyard behind the wall, covered in gore, and took stock. A quarter of her defenders were dead or too wounded to fight. Supplies were running low. Morale was fracturing. And the enemy was already regrouping for another assault. Marcus found her sitting on a pile of rubble, sharpening her blade. We can't hold another night like that. Vivienne didn't look up. I know. So what do we do? We change the game. Vivienne stood, sheathed her blade. They're expecting us to defend, to hold the walls, so we don't. Marcus stared at her. You want to attack? Against 5,000 soldiers? I want to kill their leader. Vivienne's eyes were hard. Cut the head off the snake and the body dies. This Aldrich Kylthris thinks he can walk in here and take my crown. I'm going to show him what happens to people who underestimate me. That's suicide. Maybe. But dying on my feet is better than waiting for them to tear down these walls and slaughter everyone I'm supposed to protect. Vivienne looked at him. I need 20 volunteers, best fighters we have. Fast. Quiet. Willing to die. Marcus was silent for a long moment, then nodded. I'll lead them. No, you're needed here. This is my fight. Vivienne paused. But I'll take your best soldiers. When? Tonight. While they're celebrating their first assault. While they think we're broken. We go in, we kill their king, and we disappear before they realize what happened. And if you don't come back, then you hold this city as long as you can. And you make sure they remember who died defending it. The volunteers assembled after dark. 20 soldiers who looked at Vivienne like she was either a hero or a lunatic. Maybe both. She stood before them, crown left behind for the first time since her coronation, and spoke quietly. We're not going to fight our way through 5,000 soldiers. We're going to sneak through their camp, find their king, and kill him. Fast. Brutal. No mercy. And then we run like hell. One of the soldiers, a young woman with a scar across her jaw, spoke up. Why are you leading this yourself? You're the queen. You should stay safe. Because if I ask you to die for me, the least I can do is be willing to die with you. Vivienne met her eyes. I won't order you to follow, but if you do, I promise you this. We're going to hurt them bad. And even if we don't make it back, we're going to show them that taking this city isn't free. The soldiers looked at each other. Then one by one, they nodded. Good. We leave in 10 minutes. Vivienne turned to Marcus. If we're not back by dawn, assume we're dead. Marcus's jaw was tight. Make them bleed. I intend to. They left through a sally port on the western wall, moving in silence through the ruins of buildings destroyed in the siege. The enemy camp was visible in the distance, fires burning, tents arranged in military precision. Guards patrolled the perimeter, but they were focused outward, watching for attacks from the city. They weren't expecting anyone to come from within. Vivienne led her team in a wide arc, using rubble and darkness for cover. Every step felt like walking on a blade's edge. One mistake and they'd be discovered. One alarm and they'd be swarmed. But they made it, slipped past the outer guards, moved through the camp like ghosts. Vivienne's heart hammered in her chest, but her hands were steady. She'd spent a year learning to survive. Now she was going to use every lesson. The command tent was in the center of the camp, guarded by 10 soldiers. Too many to fight quietly. Vivienne signaled her team to wait. Then she stepped out into the open. The guards saw her immediately. Weapons raised. One of them shouted, "Who goes there?" Vivienne pulled back her hood. "I'm looking for your king. Tell him Queen Vivienne wants to talk." The guards stared. Confusion. Shock. Then one of them ran into the tent, came back a moment later. "He'll see you." Vivienne walked forward. Her team stayed hidden, close enough to act, far enough to stay unseen. She stepped into the tent and came face to face with the man who wanted her throne. Aldrich Cael'thras was younger than she expected, maybe 30, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that belonged on propaganda posters. He sat in a camp chair studying a map and looked up when she entered. "Well," he said, "this is unexpected." Vivienne stepped closer. Hands visible. No weapon drawn. "I came to offer you a deal." Aldrich smiled. "I already offered you a deal. You refused. That was before you killed a quarter of my soldiers. Before you tried to tear down my walls. Before you proved you're willing to slaughter civilians to get what you want." Vivienne's voice was steady. "So here's my new offer. Single combat. You and me. Winner takes the throne. Loser walks away." Aldrich laughed. "You think I'm going to risk everything on a duel? I think you're not a coward, and I think you know your army is going to take losses trying to breach this city. Losses that'll weaken you even if you win, so you can spend weeks grinding us down. Or you can end this tonight." Aldrich studied her. "And if I refuse, then I go back to my city. We keep fighting, and eventually one of us dies. But at least I'll know I tried to spare lives, yours and mine." He was silent for a long moment. Then he stood, drew his sword. "I accept." "Good." Vivienne drew her blade. "Let's do this outside, in front of your army, so everyone knows this was a fair fight." Aldrich nodded, walked past her toward the tent entrance. Vivienne followed, and as they stepped into the firelight, she gave the signal. Her team moved. 20 soldiers exploded from the shadows. Not toward Aldrich, toward his guards, toward his commanders, toward anyone who could organize a response. It was chaos, screaming, blood. Vivienne spun, drove her blade toward Aldrich's back. He was faster than she expected, turned, blocked. Their swords met with a sound like thunder. "You lied," he snarled. "I learned from the best." Vivienne pushed forward, attacked, fast, vicious, no technique, just survival instinct honed by a year of fighting for her life. Aldrich was trained, disciplined, but Vivienne was desperate, and desperation made you dangerous. They fought in the middle of the camp while chaos erupted around them. Vivienne's soldiers were cutting through guards. Fires were spreading, tents collapsing. And through it all, she and Aldrich traded blows like dancers in a ballet written in blood. He was better than her, stronger, faster, but she was angrier, and anger was its own kind of strength. She feinted left. He bit. She came in low, drove her blade up under his ribs. Aldrich gasped, staggered, blood poured from the wound. He dropped to his knees, looked up at her with shock and something that might have been respect. "You fought well," Vivienne said quietly. "So did you." He coughed, blood on his lips. "But this doesn't end here. My army won't surrender just because I'm dead." "I know." Vivienne pulled her blade free. "But it's a start." Aldrich fell forward. Didn't move again. Vivienne turned. Her team was already retreating. She ran with them, through the camp, past burning tents and dying soldiers, back toward the city walls. Behind them, the enemy army was collapsing into chaos. Commanders shouting, soldiers confused. No one knew what to do without their king. Vivienne and her team made it back to the sally port, slipped inside, sealed it behind them, and collapsed. Dawn came. The enemy army was still there, but they weren't attacking. They were arguing, fracturing. Without Aldrich, they had no unified command. Some wanted to continue the siege. Others wanted to retreat. A few wanted to surrender. Vivienne stood on the wall, watching them tear themselves apart, and felt something close to triumph. She'd killed their king, broken their morale, bought her city time, but the cost was high. 5 of her 20 soldiers hadn't made it back, and her own body was a map of cuts and bruises that would take weeks to heal. Marcus appeared at her side. "You did it. We did it." "No, you did it." Marcus looked at her. "You went into their camp, killed their leader, and came back alive. That's the kind of thing legends are made of." Vivienne shook her head. "Legends are just stories people tell to make sense of violence. I'm not a legend. I'm just someone who refused to die quietly. That's what makes you dangerous." She looked at him. "Is that a compliment or a warning?" "Both." The enemy army broke camp by midday. Without leadership, they scattered. Some went north, some west. A few even approached the city walls under white flags, offering to surrender. Vivienne accepted the surrenders, questioned the officers, and learned the truth. Aldrich had been funded by a coalition of exiled nobles, men and women who'd lost power when she took the throne. They'd pooled resources, hired mercenaries, built an army from scratch, all with the goal of removing her. And even though Aldrich was dead, the coalition wasn't. They were still out there, still plotting, still waiting for another chance. This wasn't over. It would never be over. The crown was a target that never stopped moving, and as long as she wore it, someone would always be trying to take it. Vivienne stood in the throne room that night, crown back on her head, and stared at her reflection in the polished floor. She looked like a stranger, scarred, exhausted, hollow-eyed, but alive, and that was enough. It had to be, because survival was all she had left. The woman she'd been was gone. The queen she'd become was all that remained. And if that queen was a monster, then so be it. Monsters were good at staying alive. A week after the siege, Cedric came to see her one final time. She'd expected him to stay away, to vanish into the countryside and live out his days in obscurity. But he showed up at the palace gates and asked for an audience. She granted it, not because she wanted to see him, but because she needed closure. They met in the same garden where they'd last spoken. Cedric looked worse, like the siege had aged him 10 years. He sat across from her and didn't speak for a long time. Finally, Vivienne broke the silence. "Why are you here? I heard what you did, leading the attack, killing Aldrich, saving the city." His voice was quiet. "I wanted to tell you that I was wrong. About everything. You're not weak. You're not a pretender. You're exactly what this kingdom needs." Vivienne stared at him. "And you think that changes anything?" "No. But I needed to say it." Cedric met her eyes. "I destroyed you. I know that. And I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I threw away the only person who ever really loved me. But I'm glad you survived. I'm glad you became this. Even if I hate myself for making it necessary." Vivienne's chest tightened. "You didn't make me this. I chose this. Because the alternative was death. And I wasn't ready to die. Are you ready now?" She smiled. Bitter. Cold. "I don't know. But I'm not giving up this crown until someone pries it from my corpse." Cedric nodded. "Then I hope that day never comes." He stood, started to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, I still love you." Vivienne didn't respond, just watched him walk away. And when he was gone, she whispered to the empty garden, "I loved you too, but love doesn't save anyone. It just makes the ending hurt more." That night, Vivienne couldn't sleep. She stood on her balcony, staring out at the city she'd bled to protect, and felt the weight of everything pressing down on her. The siege was over. The enemy was scattered, her throne was secure. But at what cost? She'd become everything she'd once feared, ruthless, paranoid, willing to kill without hesitation. The crown had demanded she sacrifice her humanity, and she'd paid the price willingly. Was it worth it? She didn't know. Maybe she'd never know. All she knew was that tomorrow would bring new threats, new enemies, new battles, and she'd face them the same way she'd faced everything else, with steel in her hand and ice in her heart, because that's what survival required, and survival was all she had left. Bam! The message arrived at dawn, sealed with black wax. No signature. Just 3 words that made Vivienne's blood run cold. "The coalition sends its regards." She read it twice, then burned it. And as the flames consumed the paper, she understood the truth. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The nobles she'd exiled, the families she'd destroyed, the people who'd lost power when she took the throne. They were organizing, uniting, building something bigger than any single army. And they were coming for her. Vivienne walked to her throne room, sat down, placed the crown on her head, and looked out at the empty hall. "Let them come," she whispered. "Let them all come." Because she was Queen Vivienne Ashcombe. She'd survived exile, assassination, betrayal, siege. And she wasn't done surviving yet. The war for England had just begun. And this time, she wasn't planning to show mercy. The coalition's regards felt like a promise carved in bone. Vivienne stood at the window of her private chambers 3 days after the message arrived, watching dawn break over London with the kind of exhaustion that lived deeper than flesh. The siege had ended. Aldrich was dead. But the war hadn't stopped. It had just changed shape, evolved, become something harder to fight because it wore no armor and flew no banner. It was whispers in Parliament, gold moving through shadow channels, nobles who smiled to her face and plotted her death when she turned away. She'd spent 36 hours interrogating prisoners from Aldrich's army, breaking them down one by one until she had names, locations, plans. The coalition wasn't one organization, it was a hydra. Cut off one head and 3 more appeared. Exiled lords in France, displaced families in Spain, merchants who'd lost fortunes when she reformed trade laws. They'd pooled everything they had left into one final push, and Aldrich had just been the opening move. The real attack was coming, not with soldiers, with something worse: legitimacy. Marcus entered without knocking. "Your Majesty, Parliament is assembling. They're demanding answers about the siege, about casualties, about what happens next." Vivienne didn't turn from the window. "Let them demand. You need to address them. They're scared. And scared people make stupid decisions. Good. Fear keeps them honest." She finally looked at him. "But you're right. I'll speak to them. Just not the way they expect." Marcus studied her face. "What are you planning? Something that either saves this kingdom or destroys what's left of my soul?" Vivienne picked up the crown from the table, felt its weight. "I'm tired of fighting shadows, so I'm going to drag everything into the light, make them choose sides, force the coalition to show itself. That's dangerous. Everything I do is dangerous. That's what being queen means." She placed the crown on her head. "But I'm done playing defense. Time to make them react to me instead." Parliament was packed, every seat filled, every face a mask of calculation or fear or both. Vivienne walked in without ceremony, no guards flanking her, just her and the crown, and the weight of everything she'd survived pressing down on her shoulders. The room went silent. Not respectful silence, the kind that precedes judgment. She didn't sit, just stood at the center of the hall and spoke. 3 weeks ago, an army of 5,000 soldiers tried to take the city. They failed. Their king is dead. Their forces scattered. But the war isn't over, because the people who funded that army are still out there, still plotting, still waiting for me to show weakness so they can strike again. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Vivienne raised her hand. Silence fell. "I know some of you are wondering if this is worth it, if holding this throne is worth the blood, the sacrifice, the constant threat of violence. And I'll tell you the truth, I don't know. What I do know is that if I fall, the people who take my place won't care about reform, won't care about justice. They'll care about power, and this kingdom will burn while they fight over the ashes. Lord Pembroke stood, an older man, career politician, always careful with his words. Your Majesty, with respect, perhaps it's time to consider negotiation. Find common ground with your opponents. Avoid further bloodshed. Vivienne's smile was cold. You want me to negotiate with people who tried to kill me, who killed my soldiers, who would have slaughtered every man, woman, and child in this city if they'd breached the walls. Pembroke's face remained neutral. I'm suggesting diplomacy might achieve what violence cannot. Diplomacy is what weak rulers hide behind when they're too afraid to make hard choices. Vivienne stepped closer. I'm not weak, and I'm not hiding. So here's what's going to happen. I'm giving the coalition one chance. One, they can come forward, reveal themselves, make their case in front of this parliament, and we'll settle this through law instead of war. And if they refuse, someone else asked. Then I hunt them down. Every last one. And I make an example that ensures no one ever tries this again. Vivienne looked around the room. I'm not asking for your approval. I'm telling you what's going to happen. You can support me or get out of my way. But you don't get to sit on the fence anymore. The chamber erupted, voices shouting, arguments breaking out. But Vivienne didn't stay to hear them. She walked out the same way she'd entered, alone, unbowed, and prayed she hadn't just made a fatal mistake. The coalition's response came faster than expected, not through official channels, through a letter delivered to the palace gates by a child who vanished before guards could question him. Vivienne read it in her study, Alara and Marcus watching. We accept your offer. 3 days from now. Westminster Hall, neutral ground. We will present our case. And when Parliament sees the truth of your tyranny, they will remove you themselves. Vivienne set the letter down. They think they've already won. Maybe they have, Alara said quietly. You're giving them exactly what they want. A public platform, a chance to paint you as the villain. I know, but I'm betting they'll overplay their hand. Get arrogant, make mistakes. Vivienne looked at her. And when they do, I'll be ready. What if you're wrong? Then I lose everything. But at least I'll lose it honestly instead of being murdered in my sleep by people I never saw coming. Marcus shook his head. This is the most dangerous thing you've ever done. Good. Dangerous is where I work best. Vivienne stood. 3 days. That gives us time to prepare. I want every person in that hall vetted, every entrance secured, and I want contingency plans for every way this could go wrong. You think they'll try to kill you during the hearing? Marcus asked. I think they'll try whatever gives them the best chance of winning. So we prepare for everything. The next 3 days were a controlled descent into paranoia that felt like strategy. Vivienne slept with a blade under her pillow and woke at every sound. She reviewed intelligence reports until her eyes burned, rehearsed arguments, anticipated attacks, built defenses around defenses. And through it all, she felt something shifting inside her, not breaking, transforming. The woman who'd stood trial a year ago had begged for mercy. The woman who'd survived exile had learned to fight. The queen who'd killed Aldrich had proven she could win. But this woman, the one preparing to face her enemies in open court, was something else entirely. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for the right to define what survival meant, to prove that strength didn't require cruelty. That power could exist without paranoia. That maybe, just maybe, there was a way to rule that didn't destroy everything human inside her. It was a foolish hope, naive, the kind of thing that got queens killed, but it was the only thing she had left that felt like her own choice instead of necessity's command. On the morning of the hearing, Cedric appeared at the palace. She hadn't invited him, hadn't expected him. But he stood in her study like a ghost from a life she'd tried to forget. You shouldn't be here, she said. I know, but I couldn't stay away. Not today. He looked at her with something that might have been regret or might have been grief. You're walking into an ambush, you know that. Probably. Then why do it? Because I'm tired of running, tired of fighting shadows. If they want to destroy me, let them try it in the open where everyone can see. Vivienne turned to face him. Why do you care? You made it clear a long time ago that I wasn't worth fighting for. Cedric flinched. I was wrong. I've been wrong about everything. And I know saying sorry doesn't fix anything, but I needed you to know that I see what you've become, what you've survived, and I'm in awe of it. Awe doesn't keep people alive. No, but maybe it's worth something anyway. He stepped closer. If you don't come back from this, I'll come back. Vivienne's voice was steel. I always do. Cedric nodded. Then good luck, Your Majesty. He left, and Vivienne stood alone in the silence, feeling the weight of everything she'd lost and everything she'd become pressing down on her like gravity. Westminster Hall was packed beyond capacity, every seat filled, people standing in the aisles, nobles, commoners, merchants, soldiers. Everyone who had a stake in England's future crammed into one space to witness what might be the kingdom's most important trial in a century. Vivienne entered last. No ceremony, no fanfare, just her in black silk and the crown on her head. She took her seat at the defendant's table because that's what she was, really, the one on trial, and waited. The coalition representatives entered from the opposite side, 5 of them. All nobles Vivienne recognized: Lord Blackwood, Lady Seraphine, Count Aldrich, Duchess Margrave, and at their head, an old man Vivienne had never seen before. White hair, sharp eyes, the kind of face that had watched empires rise and fall. He introduced himself. My name is Lord Chancellor Emeritus Thaddeus Corvain. I speak for the Coalition of Legitimate Governance, and I am here to present evidence that Queen Vivienne has no legal right to the throne she occupies. The room exploded. Shouts, arguments. The presiding judge, a neutral arbiter appointed specifically for this hearing, slammed his gavel until order returned. Proceed, the judge said. Corvain stepped forward. He was theatrical, practiced, the kind of man who'd spent decades manipulating courts and councils. Queen Vivienne claims legitimacy through the Aurelian bloodline, a royal house extinct for 2 centuries. But we have obtained documents proving that the Aurelian succession was legally invalidated following the War of the Thorns. Any descendants were specifically barred from inheriting the crown. He produced papers, spread them across the table, documents sealed with ancient wax, legal proclamations, royal decrees. Furthermore, Corvain continued, we have testimony from 3 royal archivists confirming that the genealogical records Queen Vivienne used to justify her claim were incomplete, possibly forged. Her mother's lineage cannot be conclusively traced to the Aurelian line. More papers, more evidence. It kept coming, wave after wave, each piece carefully designed to dismantle Vivienne's legitimacy. She sat through it all in silence, listening, watching, waiting for the moment she knew was coming. Finally, Corvain turned to face her directly. You have built your entire reign on a lie, and when this court sees the truth, they will have no choice but to remove you from power. The room was silent, every eye on Vivienne, waiting for her response. She stood slowly, walked to the center of the hall, looked at Corvain, then at the assembled crowd. You're right, she said quietly. The room erupted. Corvain's face showed triumph. The coalition representative smiled. Vivienne raised her hand. Silence gradually returned. You're right that my claim is questionable, that the documents are incomplete, that legally I might not have an undeniable right to this crown. She paused. But here's what you're not saying. Here's what you're hoping everyone forgets. When I returned to England, this kingdom was on the brink of civil war. Parliament was fractured. The throne was empty, and every candidate had armies preparing to fight for supremacy. She walked slowly through the hall as she spoke, meeting eyes, connecting. I didn't take power through violence. I took it through revelation, through proving that the people who'd condemned me were the real traitors. And yes, I used my bloodline to justify my claim, because that's how succession works in this kingdom. You need a story that makes sense to people who are desperate for stability. But the real question isn't whether my claim is perfect. It's whether I've been a good queen. Vivienne stopped, turned to face Corvain. So let's ask them. Let's ask the people in this room what kind of ruler I've been. She gestured to the crowd. You, merchant in the 3rd row. Have you prospered under my reforms or suffered? The merchant stood, nervous. Prospered. The new trade laws opened routes that were closed for decades. And you? Vivienne pointed to a soldier. Have I been fair to the military or wasteful? The soldier stood at attention. Fair, Your Majesty. You fight alongside us, bleed with us. We'd follow you anywhere. One by one, Vivienne called on people. Nobles who'd initially opposed her but seen corruption dismantled. Commoners who'd gained protections. Families who'd been lifted from poverty. Not everyone spoke in her favor. Some criticized her harshness, her severity, her willingness to execute traitors without mercy. But the overwhelming sentiment was clear. She'd been brutal, ruthless, uncompromising, and effective. Corvain's face darkened as he realized what was happening. She was putting her reign on trial instead of her bloodline, making it about results instead of legitimacy. This is a legal matter, he protested, not a popularity contest. You're wrong, Vivienne said. Kingship is exactly a popularity contest. It always has been. Bloodlines and laws are just stories we tell to justify who gets power. But the real test is whether people will follow you when things get hard, whether they'll fight for you when enemies come, whether they believe you're worth the sacrifices they make. She turned back to the assembled hall. I'm not a perfect queen. I've made mistakes, killed people who maybe didn't deserve it, become colder and harder than I ever wanted to be. But I've held this kingdom together when it was falling apart, and I'll keep holding it together as long as I have strength left. So here's my question for this court, for every person in this room. Do you want a ruler with a perfect legal claim who'll plunge you into civil war? Or do you want someone who's proven they can lead even when the cost is brutal? Silence. Heavy. Absolute. Then someone in the back started clapping, slow at first, then others joined, then more, until half the hall was applauding and the other half was arguing and chaos was blooming like fire. The judge slammed his gavel. Order. Order in this court. But it was too late. The moment had shifted. Corvain knew it. The coalition knew it. They'd lost. Not legally, but politically. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The judge deliberated for 3 hours. When he returned, his face was grave. This court finds that while questions exist regarding the technical legitimacy of Queen Vivienne's bloodline claim, her rule has been effective and supported by sufficient consensus to warrant continuation. The challenge is dismissed. Corvain was on his feet immediately. This is a travesty, a mockery of law. The judge's voice was iron. The decision stands. This hearing is concluded. Guards moved in to escort the coalition representatives out. They went without violence, but their faces promised this wasn't over. Vivienne sat through it all, feeling nothing. Not triumph, not relief, just exhaustion so profound it felt like drowning in shallow water. She'd won. Again. But the cost kept rising, and she wasn't sure how much more she could pay before there was nothing left. That night, Vivienne dismissed her guards, locked herself in her chambers, and for the first time in months let herself break. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall and tears running down her face that she didn't bother to wipe away. She'd become exactly what she'd needed to become. Strong, ruthless, unbreakable. And in the process, she'd lost every piece of the woman who'd once believed in love and loyalty and the goodness of people. The crown sat on the table across the room, mocking her, reminding her that this was what she'd fought for. This isolation, this emptiness, this throne made of ash and blood. She thought about Cedric, about the life they might have had if he'd believed her, if he'd fought for her, if he'd been stronger. But he hadn't. And she'd survived his weakness by becoming strong enough for both of them. The problem was that strength like hers didn't leave room for anything soft, anything human, anything that felt like living instead of just not dying. A knock at the door. Vivienne wiped her face, composed herself. Come in. Alara entered, saw Vivienne on the floor, sat down beside her without asking permission. You won, Alara said simply. Did I? You're still queen. The coalition is fractured. Parliament supports you. That's winning. Then why does it feel like I lost everything that mattered? Alara was silent for a moment. Because power is a trade. You give up pieces of yourself to hold on to it. And eventually you look in the mirror and don't recognize who's staring back. Is that what happened to you? Years ago. Alara's smile was thin, but I made peace with it. Decided that being effective mattered more than being happy. And does it. Most days. Alara looked at her. But you're different. You still have pieces of yourself left. Pieces that aren't corrupted by the crown. And that's dangerous. Because those pieces make you vulnerable. So what do I do? You decide what kind of queen you want to be. The kind who sacrifices everything for power. Or the kind who finds a way to hold on to something human even when it makes her weaker. And if I can't do both, then you choose and live with the consequences. Alara stood. But whatever you choose, do it soon because this limbo is killing you faster than any enemy ever could. She left, and Vivienne sat alone in the dark, knowing Alara was right. She couldn't keep being both the monster the throne required and the woman she used to be. One of them had to die. The question was which one she could bear to lose. Morning came with news that the coalition was disbanding. Not voluntarily, but without Corvain's leadership. He'd been arrested on charges of sedition. They couldn't maintain unity. The nobles scattered. Some fled England. Others bent the knee. A few were executed. Parliament stabilized. The reforms continued. Trade routes reopened. Common families gained protections they'd never had before. The kingdom, slowly, began to heal. And Vivienne ruled over it all with efficiency that bordered on cold machinery. Weeks passed. Then months. The immediate threats faded, but new ones always emerged. That was the nature of power. It attracted predators the way blood attracted sharks. Vivienne met each challenge the same way, with calculation, with force when necessary, with ruthlessness when force wasn't enough. But late at night, alone in her chambers, she felt herself hollowing out, becoming an echo of something that used to be human. And she wondered if this was what victory was supposed to feel like. If every queen who'd ever worn this crown had felt the same creeping emptiness, the same sense that they'd won everything except what actually mattered. Well, check. 6 months after the coalition's collapse, Cedric requested an audience. Vivienne almost refused, but curiosity got the better of her. They met in the palace gardens. Neutral ground. Cedric looked better than he had in months. Healthier. Like he'd finally stopped trying to drown himself in wine and guilt. "You wanted to see me," Vivienne said. "I'm leaving England," he said simply. "Going north. Maybe Scotland. Somewhere I can be useful without being haunted by everything I destroyed. Running away again. Probably. But staying here just reminds me of what I lost, what I threw away. And I can't keep living in that shadow." Vivienne studied him. "And you came to say goodbye." "I came to tell you something." Cedric stepped closer. "You were right. About everything. Love isn't enough. Trust matters more than feeling. And I failed you in every way that counted." "I know. But you survived anyway. Became something incredible. And I'm proud of you. Even if I have no right to be." Vivienne felt something crack in her chest. A small thing. Barely noticeable. But there. "I loved you," she said quietly. "More than I've ever loved anyone. And you destroyed me." "I know. And I'll carry that for the rest of my life." Cedric's eyes were wet. "But for what it's worth, I hope you find a way to be happy. To be more than just a queen. To be human again." "Is that possible?" "I don't know, but I hope so. Because the world needs people like you. People who can be strong without losing their souls." He turned to leave. Vivienne's voice stopped him. "Cedric." He looked back. "Thank you. For letting me be angry. For not making excuses. For finally being honest." He nodded, tried to smile, failed. "Goodbye, Vivienne." "Goodbye, Cedric." She watched him walk away and felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just acceptance. He'd hurt her, betrayed her, made her into something she'd never wanted to be. But she'd survived. And that survival meant she got to choose what came next. Not him, not the crown, not anyone but her. For the first time in a year, she felt like the future might hold something other than just endless fighting. The coronation anniversary came with ceremonies Vivienne barely participated in. Public appearances, speeches, noble houses paying tribute. It was theater, necessary, but exhausting. That night, she stood alone in the throne room after everyone had left. The crown sat on a cushion beside the throne. She picked it up, felt its weight. This thing had cost her everything. Her marriage, her innocence, her ability to trust. It had turned her into a weapon, Sharp, effective, cold, but it had also saved a kingdom, given justice to people who'd never had it, created stability in a place that had been tearing itself apart. Was that worth the price? She still didn't know, but as she stood there, alone in the dark, she made a decision. She would keep wearing the crown, keep ruling, keep making the hard choices. But she would also try to hold on to the pieces of herself that weren't corrupted by power. The parts that still felt, still cared, still believed that strength didn't have to mean cruelty. It would be harder that way, more vulnerable, more dangerous. But maybe that was the point. Maybe being a good ruler meant being willing to risk everything for the chance that something better was possible. She placed the crown on her head, felt it settle, and walked out of the throne room into a future she couldn't predict. Years passed, not smoothly, but steadily. Vivienne's rule became legendary, not because she was perfect, but because she was consistent, fair when she could be, ruthless when necessary, and always focused on what the kingdom needed rather than what she wanted. Rebellions came, she crushed them. Conspiracies emerged, she unraveled them. Foreign powers tested her borders. She pushed back, but she also did something else. Something that surprised everyone, including herself. She started changing, not into something softer, but into something more complex. She learned to delegate, to trust advisors even when it was hard, to show mercy when execution would have been easier. She reformed the military, expanded education, funded infrastructure, built hospitals, created systems that didn't depend on her being personally strong, but on the kingdom being structurally sound. And slowly, grudgingly, she let people in. Not far, not deep, but enough that she wasn't completely alone anymore. Alar remained her closest advisor. Marcus led her military. New faces appeared in Parliament, younger, more progressive, people who'd grown up under her rule and knew only a kingdom where merit mattered more than bloodline. It wasn't the life Vivienne had imagined. It wasn't the life she'd wanted, but it was hers. And she'd built it from nothing, from exile and betrayal and blood. And that meant something. On her 10th anniversary as queen, Vivienne stood on the same balcony where she'd first addressed London as its ruler. The crowd below was enormous. Thousands of faces looking up at her with something that might have been love, or might have been respect, or might have been fear. She didn't know. Didn't need to. Because she'd learned something in a decade of ruling. Power wasn't about being loved. It was about being effective. About building something that lasted longer than you did. And she'd built that. A kingdom that was stronger, fairer, more stable than it had been in centuries. It had cost her everything. Her innocence, her love, years of her life spent fighting instead of living. But looking down at those faces, she felt something that might have been peace, not happiness. She'd given up on happiness years ago, but peace. The kind that comes from knowing you did what needed to be done. That you survived when survival should have been impossible. That you left the world better than you found it, even if it broke you in the process. The crowd erupted in cheers. Vivienne raised her hand. They quieted. 10 years ago, she said, her voice carrying across the square, I stood before you as an exile who'd lost everything. Today I stand as your queen, and in that decade, we've built something together. Not perfect, but real. A kingdom where justice matters more than privilege, where strength comes from unity instead of oppression, where the future is something we create instead of something that happens to us. The crowd roared approval. Vivienne waited for silence, but I didn't do this alone. Every person who fought for reform, every soldier who defended our borders, every family that survived hardship and kept believing things could be better, you built this. I was just the person willing to take the blame when things went wrong and give you the credit when they went right. She paused. Let the moment breathe. So thank you for trusting me even when I didn't deserve it, for fighting alongside me even when the cost was brutal, for believing that this kingdom was worth saving. She stepped back from the balcony. The crowd's cheers followed her inside. And for the first time in 10 years, Vivienne removed the crown without feeling like she was betraying something. She set it on the table, looked at it. This thing had made her a monster, a weapon, a queen, but it had also made her someone who could survive anything, build anything, protect anything that mattered. And in the end, maybe that was enough. Kissing. That night, Vivienne walked through the palace gardens alone. No guards, no advisors, Just her and the moonlight and the silence. She thought about the woman she'd been. The Duchess who'd believed in loyalty and love and fairness. That woman was gone. Dead. Buried under years of survival and compromise and necessary cruelty. But maybe that was okay. Maybe becoming something else wasn't the same as losing yourself. Maybe it was just evolution, the kind that let you survive when the old version of you would have broken. She stopped at a fountain, stared at her reflection in the water. The face looking back was older, harder, scarred in ways that didn't show on skin. But it was still her face, still her eyes, still recognizable as the woman who'd loved Cedric and trusted her kingdom and believed in things worth fighting for. The monster and the woman, both existing in the same body, both necessary, both real. Vivienne smiled, small, sad, but genuine. She'd survived. And in surviving, she'd learned that strength didn't mean never breaking. It meant breaking and healing and breaking again and still getting up. That was the real lesson of power. Not that it made you invincible, but that it taught you how to keep going even when everything inside you was screaming to stop. She turned from the fountain, walked back toward the palace, toward her chambers, toward another day of ruling a kingdom that would always need more than she could give. But that was okay, because she'd learned to live with never being enough, to accept that some battles couldn't be won, that some wounds never healed, that some prices had to be paid over and over again. And still, she kept going, because that's what queens did. They endured, they sacrificed, they carried burdens no one else could see, and they did it knowing that history would judge them not by how much they suffered, but by what they built while suffering. Vivienne Ashcombe, exile, survivor, monster, queen. She'd been all of those things, would continue being all of those things. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The palace doors closed behind her. The crown waited in her chambers. Tomorrow would bring new threats, new challenges, new reasons to doubt herself. But tonight, she was just a woman who'd fought impossible odds and won. And that was worth something. That was worth everything. 20 years later, historians would write about Queen Vivienne's reign as a golden age, an era of reform and stability that transformed England from a fractured kingdom into a unified power. They would talk about her ruthlessness, her brilliance, her ability to make impossible decisions without hesitation. But they would miss the most important part, the part that mattered most. She'd been human, fallible, broken in ways that never fully healed, and she'd ruled anyway, not because she was perfect, but because she was willing to pay the price that perfection demanded. That was the real legacy. Not the reforms or the victories or the years of peace, but the proof that you could survive being destroyed and still build something beautiful from the ruins. That was Vivienne's gift to her kingdom. Not invincibility, but resilience. The kind that said, you will break. You will fail. You will lose things that matter. And still, you can choose to keep fighting. That was the lesson. That was the story. That was the truth of the queen who'd been cast out as a traitor and returned as a legend. And it was enough. It had to be. Because in the end, all any of us can do is survive the life we're given and try to leave something worth remembering. Vivienne did that. And the crown she wore, heavy with sacrifice and soaked in blood, became a symbol not of power but of what power cost, and why some people paid it anyway. Not because they wanted to, but because someone had to. And they were strong enough to carry the weight, even when it killed them slowly, even when it took everything, even when the only reward was knowing you'd done what needed to be done. That was enough. It had to be. And so Vivienne Ashcombe ruled her kingdom with an iron will and a broken heart, and hands that had learned to hold both crown and knife. And she was remembered not as a perfect queen, but as a real one. The kind that survived, the kind that mattered, the kind that proved strength wasn't about never falling. It was about getting up every single time, no matter the cost, no matter the pain, no matter what.